Okay, what do you think? Should we just get started? I think people are joining in. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
let's
but it's a weeknight, so I'm sure people have got things to do. So, mate, if you want to jump into this, I'm happy to start. And I guess as people join and the crowd builds, they'll catch on.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So let me just do a quick introduction. Stu, you are known to many people around here in the hills of the Northwest. You have been, or you are the number one auctioneer here. You are the most busiest one. And yes, thank you for taking time out today, which definitely is a very, big pleasure for me, myself, as well as the people who are joining in. I know you have like more than 2 decades of real estate experience and 15 years at Benson Auctions as auctioneer, multiple awards, TV shows, and yeah, and you are taking time out to give back something to the community, which is really great, and quite appreciated. Uh, yeah, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's not a bad introduction. I'll take that. Mate, look, I if you want me to delve into, I guess, just a little bit more of I guess my credentials and just sort of the frame, where I sit in the marketplace and my area of expertise, I'm more than happy to do that. And then I guess time sensitive wise, we'll probably just get into your topics of conversation, which is the premise of Auctions Uncovered, and that's to talk about, I guess, demystifying the auction process, to get into, I guess, common auction mistakes that buyers can make, when considering whether or not they're going to engage with an agent, a property indeed, or even an advocate like yourself to go down the path of purchasing auctions. On the agenda, we've also got how to do well at an auction, and I, as an auctioneer, whilst I can't sell every home to every registered buyer, I want to make sure that everybody who is there is educated from perhaps things that they don't know. And I think initiatives like this that you've put your hand up to host and facilitate should hopefully empower buyers. And that's what I want. I want my buyers to give it to me on the auction floor, to push back a little bit, to come in armed and ready and knowledgeable. An empowered buyer is a smart buyer, and more often than not, as much as I love it, an empowered buyer is somebody that is probably going to bid that extra couple of bids at the end because they appreciate the transparency of the process, the scarcity of the asset, and also the dynamics of the market that will ensure that their investment will continue to rise over time. So education piece is very important, and I think it's a space that's actually lacking. So I'm really honoured to be doing this tonight, mate. So first things first, if you think that's an okay way to go about things, I'll just quickly jump in and give those who might be a little bit unfamiliar with me, I guess, a bit of a backstory up until now.
Yeah, sure, Stu. I'll take out the front page. I just wanted to mention to everyone. So we are bringing in this one, from my agency, which is Hills and Shores Property Buyers, and Sydney Property Talk, which is something you would have heard of. We try to share, learn, discuss about properties, market analysis,
Yeah.
and property analysis and things like that. And then we are, collaborating with Stu this time for the webinar. So yes, I will just move to the next slide here. And these are the topics, as you all know. So we have not changed anything. Q&A, be ready for Q&A. Type your questions in the Q&A section of the webinar. And yes, we will pick those ones up as we go. All right. So over to you, Stu. I think you can, give the background and then, keep
Okay.
it
Well,
flowing.
I would also just to retouch on Anab's point that during the process at all, if anything comes up and you want to ask a question, drop it into the chat. We'll circle back at the end of the webinar and we'll cover off on all the questions. And there are no silly questions. I've been in the real estate space for 23 years. I've been doing auctions for around 16, running Benson Auctions for 15 years. And so I might breeze over something that to me is just second nature and a phrase that I would use commonly, whereas you might be sitting there wondering what that phrase is or what that terminology means. So there are no silly questions. Certainly, I don't expect anybody in this chat to know as much about auctions as me. And so it's with humility that I'll happily circle back and cover off on anything. So I guess the real quick introduction, and I'm an auctioneer, so I do talk a lot, but the introduction is that I've been in the real estate space pretty much my entire professional career. jumped into real estate when I was 21 and a bit years of age, and did the hard yards, the door knocking, the letterbox dropping, the things that you would do as a young recruit and a cadet, and you would be called an associate agent these days with the licensing criteria. So I cut my teeth and I did the hard yards, and 3.5 years, that was enough for me. I got out of selling real estate and went into real estate media. I helped grow the Domain brand that we all know now as, major sponsor of the block and aligned with the Sydney Morning Herald and the Australian Financial Review. But back in those days, the internet was also booming. Apps weren't a thing. Smartphones weren't a thing. And I took my real estate knowledge and my buyer behavior knowledge in the real estate space and helped Domain grow their multi-channel offering and help them grow from a desktop site to an app-based site to a tablet site and now to an agile site that really helps with multimedia presentation of properties as well. Whilst I was in that space, my then wife and I decided to have some kids, and they were expensive, and my wage at Domain wasn't cutting it. I needed a side gig, and a couple of people told me that I spoke well and I conducted myself well and I knew the area like the back of my hand. Had I ever thought of being an auctioneer? So I jumped into auctioneering and dabbled with a couple of brands working for them, and decided that with my local knowledge, being born and raised here in the northwest of Sydney, and then also with my knowledge of the real estate market and my connections within it, that I should just go out on my own. So Benson Auctions actually celebrates 15 years of operations this week. So it's our birthday, and that 15 years has put us in very good stead and very much in the public persona when it comes to auctions. A lot of people, when they think of auctions in the northwest of Sydney, they think of Benson Auctions, and it's because they see us every week, week in, week out. So that's where I sit, and that's how I guess I fit into the vernacular. To go back when I started the business 15 years ago, nobody did auctions. Auctions were Lower North Shore, Upper North Shore, northern beaches, or in the eastern suburbs. You had to have a premium blue chip, either close to the Sydney CBD or close to the water, whether that was a beach or an estuary or somewhere that was close to maybe the Parramatta River adjacent flowing into Balmain, or something in and around the harbour side. Apart from that, auctions were really, if it was a deceased estate or something unique that was very hard to price, and the agent just said, well, you know what, we'll take it to auction and we'll do it that way. I started getting agents to believe in the auction process, and all of a sudden an office that never did auctions would do three every 6 months, and then somebody would leave that office and go to another office, and they would take their learnings with them and take me with them. And then the office next door would say, well, hang on a second, these guys are doing auctions. We want to do auctions. We'll call Stu. And they called me in, and all of a sudden this natural organic growth. And we went from just as short as maybe 10 or 12 years ago, a Super Saturday in the Hillshire, that might have consisted of 10 auctions in the entire suburb, in the entire LGA region. And these days, auctions are the premium method of sale. So I'm at the front of it all, and I love doing it. And Anab, I see you every single weekend in and around doing your research and representing buyers. So I have no doubt that within a couple of years, mate, you'll be as well known in the space as I am here in the Northwest. So that's why I've got to keep working with you, mate, because you might be, I'm going to be seeing a lot of you. So I can circle back now, mate, if that's enough of an introduction in terms of my credentials, demystifying the auction process. And if I go off track on this, please feel free to steer me back into the lane in which you'd like me to explain. But look, I guess a lot of people just wonder, why are these homes going to auction? Why can't I just offer private treaty? And as a vendor, I guess whilst your audience is going to be people who are looking at transacting, I would imagine, people who are in their property search in terms of researching, and am I maybe going to attend an auction? If we fast forward 7 or 10 years, if you are investing or you are purchasing to own and occupy, you might be looking to sell that property. And so that property, more than likely, if it is here in the northwest of Sydney, it'll be offered to market as an auction property. So it is good to know both sides of the equation, and not only empower yourself as a buyer, but also understand the dynamics behind auction as a would-be seller as well. Look, to be honest, auctions are almost as old as recorded time itself. You go back to 500 BC and the Babylonians, they would auction off marital partners, whether it be young women or young men. They would auction off land. They would auction off antiquities and things that meant a lot to them as a society. You fast forward to the Roman Empire and the Greeks, and again, they would auction off whether it be slave labor or whether it be land holdings. They would go to war, and the term that we all know as the spoils of war, which is a common term used these days, was quite literally at the end of a large battle, either via the Greeks or the Romans. They would then the victorious team would put their spears in the ground triumphantly when they came back to town, and they would drop their helmets on the ground, and then a public town crier would come out, and they would auction off those because they were the spoils of war. They were the cherished items of the brave soldiers that went into battle and claimed another land territory and another land mass for the empire. And so it was seen as something that was rare and something that had tangible value. And as we traverse through time, that way of transacting was always a way of just offering something that was a little bit different, a little bit unique, a little bit scarce to market. And it now into modern times, art and jewelry and cars that are historic. We still find the auction method of sale used in many different facets of life. But what it did find its way into was property, and I'm glad that it did. But what it was originally used for was for special property and different property and property that was hard to value. And so we would do what was called an ascending auction process, and that ascending auction process would allow the masses to value these assets that otherwise an agent or somebody who was in stocks or shares or chattels, whatever it might be, perhaps couldn't value. And then we go into hyper modern times, and it's just a way that we sell things because it's supply, demand. And in the city metropolitan market, we are just forever behind the eight ball when it comes to immigration, which we need. We're a young country based on the land mass that we have and the cities that we have scattered around that seaboard of our country. We have nowhere near enough cities, nowhere near enough infrastructure, and nowhere near enough houses. New South Wales could build 80 to 100,000 homes every single year, and we'd still be behind. Because of that lack of stock, we are, I think, for the foreseeable future, and I mean generational futures, we are in a supply and demand marketplace, and for that reason, auctions will always hold a place. So it is important that those who are considering buying in the marketplace are aware of best practices and how to arm themselves. And I don't mean arm themselves as if you're one of those Roman or Greek gladiators going into battle, but when you do turn up to auctions, more than likely there's going to be a couple of other people there holding bidder cards, ready to bid, ready to engage. And I guess the more you know, the more you know. So in terms of its place in the current marketplace, it really is supply and demand. You will find that most people want to buy a house in the northwest of Sydney that's close to the metro. They also want to buy a house that's in a good schooling zone. They also want to buy a house that's a little bit close to the arterial roads, because if we've got to work in the city and we've got to jump on the M2 or the T-way via a bus, we don't want to be driving for 20 minutes to get to that service. So for that reason, the asset itself almost automatically becomes a highly sought after property. And once it's highly sought after, it means that the agent is going to recommend an auction because it puts all the same people in the same place at the same time and allows them to decide what it's worth. And just this weekend, for example, if I go back to just Sunday, so I'm talking 72 hours ago, one of my agents, Shiv Nair, and myself set the new all-time suburb record in Glenwood, $2,602,000. Now, this property on paper, if we were looking at previous sales, what it offered, where it was on paper, it was probably a 2.3 to 2.5 property, but it was competition that delivered our vendors that result. But also the transparency of that forum meant that the 11 people who loved that house and wanted that house all had a chance to put their offers forward in real time. So whilst there were 10 buyers who missed out, those 10 buyers were all given the chance. There was no closed door negotiation. It wasn't phone calls at 11 o'clock at night trying to do a deal. There wasn't that wondering, oh, goodness me, is there another buyer? Is there another offer? Does that offer exist? Look, real estate agents, they don't get a good rap. There are bad real estate agents. And I'd caveat that by saying there are bad plumbers, there are bad tilers, there are bad solicitors, there are bad nurses, they exist in all walks of life. But Agents are very public facing. We put our signs on every corner. We're on the back of every bus. We're a pretty easy target. So when we muck up or do something wrong or do something dodgy, it's out there for everyone to see. So I get that. But with that, I think with that sort of connotation and that bad reputation, I think sometimes the auction is maybe the easiest way for an agent to distance themselves from price and say, you know what, I've got an idea of what it's worth. I'm going to put a guide on the property, but then I want you to all come and I want you to price it. So a lot of the time, the purpose of an auction is we would rather just let the market decide what the property is worth. And so that really, mate, if I was to summarize where a buyer needs to be, they need to be researched. You need to go to auctions and watch out how they play out. Maybe watch other auctioneers or other brands and see how those agents are working the floor. See how those auctioneers are actually working the crowd and how they're doing it. You've got to have experience. You don't know how to ride a bike until you've ridden a bike, and you're going to fall off and you're going to wobble and you don't know what you're doing until you do it. Go to auctions, attend auctions, speak to experts. Like, you can reach out to me at any time. I get hit up in my inbox every single day of the week, 52 weeks a year, from somebody saying, hey, Stu, you don't know me, but my wife and I are going to an auction next week. It's with a brand that you don't represent, so you're not going to be the auctioneer, but could you give me some tips? And I say, well, look, even if I was the auctioneer, I'm happy to give you tips. I think people should lean on experts like yourself and people who can do research for them, better equip them. Do that market research as to where a property sits in the market price-wise. An informed and empowered buyer is one who's going to make a really rational decision on auction day. And that's not to say you should rationalize yourself out of the property. If it comes to another $5,000 or a $10,000 or a $15,000 bid at the end of an auction, look, it's easy for me to say it's not a lot of money, because it is a lot of money. It comes with a 30-year mortgage. It could mean the difference between, an extra coffee a day or an extra, going out to dinner once a month, which you and your family love to do. You might have to pull back on that. But the way that the Hillshire market, the Northwest market, and indeed the Sydney metropolitan market is, that stretch on auction day, as sickening as it might feel and as uncomfortable as it might be, a year from then, you'll look back and you think, goodness me, I'm glad we did, because the market shifted another $100,000. Yes, I spent 15 more than I wanted to, but I'm up 75 on paper, 85 on paper. It's one of those things where the market is going to continue to rise as long as there are agents pushing the market, auctioneers pushing the market, and buyers pushing the market due to supply and demand. So, mate, look, getting your head around price guiding and your borrowing capacity, comparable sales, all those sorts of things, whilst they might seem a little bit straightforward to me because I'm living it and breathing it 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, a lot of buyers, I think, could probably do a lot more research than they maybe are, and leaning on professionals such as yourself. So, is there anything in particular, mate, with regards to that and demystifying, that you want to be to hone in on? Maybe some terminology, or maybe some phrases, or maybe some things around price guiding or vendor bids. I mean, as an auctioneer, again, these are all things that are just second nature to me, and to buyers, maybe not so. And I know that we're going to circle back to Q&A, and that might afford me an opportunity to touch on some of these things. But based on your agenda and expectations, are there some things that you would like me to touch on with regards to what's a reserve price, what's a vendor bid, where price guides sit in relation to where the expectation might be? Are these sorts of things cover off on in this part of the topic?
Yeah, Stu. I think maybe you can talk through what happens behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And then talk about those terminologies, because they are very confusing for a new buyer when they come in and say, oh, what does reserve price means? Do I need to know? Nobody told me what it is, and so on, right? So you can just talk about maybe how things happen behind the scenes, and you don't have to tell your strategy, but I think, in a way, we do these things before we come to the auction, and then.
Yeah, look, I'm pretty famed at being an open book. I just think I think the more educated agents, buyers, vendors, sellers are, the better we all play on auction day. And so I'm more than happy to sort of open up the curtain and just show you what goes on behind the scenes to a degree. I'm more than happy to do that. First things first, I don't know an agent who gets a price right pretty much ever. Like, we are always wrong, but we're happy to be wrong, because at the end of the day, as good as we are at what we do, and I'll tell you what, the Hills and Northwest is blessed. I promise you, and I know we're not having a good time in the media right now with a particular agency group, but I mean, look, things happen, and things have been monitored, and things will all come out in the wash. But we do have hands down and metrically and in terms of numbers and sales and data, it's irrefutable. We have some of the best agents in the country right here in the northwest of Sydney, and we have some of the best practitioners of not only auction but also private treaty. Not everybody's going to buy via auction, not everybody's going to sell via auction, and even me, when I was listing and selling, I understand that private treaty has a place. It's in some agents' repertoire and in some suburbs. It's just how things are done. But look, agents get prices wrong, and for that reason, auction helps them just iron out that. We're wrong by overestimating what a property is worth. You go in and tell Mr. and Mrs. Vendor that you think the house is going to sell for $1 million and ends up selling for $995. You're wrong. You're only $5,000 wrong, but you're wrong. You go and tell them you think it's worth $1 million and you go to auction, it sells for 1.2. You were wrong, but you were very wrong in a good way. Sometimes you have a property that you swear black and blue should be worth $1 million, and for whatever reason, the market just does not agree with you, or another agent sells something cheap, or all of a sudden there's some pressures and strains in the next suburb, and people think, well, goodness me, rather than spend $1 million on this one, I'll just go to the next suburb and buy a bigger house for $1,050,000, and that then puts backwards pressure on your asset and ends up selling for $9 million. Agents are wrong all the time, but it's not through lack of expert marketing and expert negotiation and expert knowledge of what they do, but ultimately we're not buying the houses, so we can give you as much of an advice as a seller that we can, but we're not selling. And that's why we tend to go to auction as an industry here, up here in the northwest. It's so that the buyers can truly decide. Now, in saying that, an agent does have to legally provide a homeowner with what we deem as being comparable sales. These are sales that Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I think your house is worth this, give or take. I'm happy to be wrong either way if the market decides, but this is where I think it sits in the market. I'd like to be wrong in the positive. I might be wrong in the negative, but I'd like to think that we're going to get this price or above, and these are the reasons why. And an agent must furnish, legally, they must furnish a vendor with sales that they deem as being fair and reasonable estimations on what their property should sell for. Now, if the agent is colluding and sending the vendor really low estimates of prices in an effort to get the vendor to give them a really low contract price, which might mean that knowing that they're going in low, they're able to guide the property low, get heaps of people there. All of a sudden, the property sells for $500,000 more than everybody thought because there was an element of collusion. The owner really has some onus on them to have pushed back on that low estimation to start with and say, well, why would I sign with this agent when 4 other agents said it's sat here in the market? This guy thinks it's down here. So an owner needs to be educated on what their home is worth as well as a buyer. I'll put that out there right now. But again, to circle back to what I was saying, agents furnish a seller with comparable sales. Now, those comparable sales aren't a secret that just that agent has access to. That agent is going on to realestate.com.au. That agent is going on to Cortality, which was CoreLogic. They're going on to domain.com.au. The agent is effectively doing the same research that Mr. and Mrs. Home Buyer and people who engage UNAB and people who I see registered at auctions. It's the same research. You've got the same channels. You've got the same possibility to come into an auction with the same data set that the agent is using to influence the vendor. So do your research and have a look. Now, markets move quickly. Interest rates affect markets. Global geopolitics affects markets. The stock market affects markets. There are so many little things that affect what goes on. And we might not think it, but it really, really does. People's buying habits, spending habits, going out for dinner, buying new cars, purchasing televisions, all of these little micro indicators of how good an economy is performing, all funneled down to the property sector. And so when you are doing your research, the point of me mentioning that is try and keep your research and your comparable sales when you are researching an area to probably 3 to 4 months at the moment. Anything longer than that isn't a comparable sale because there's so many market dynamics, whether it's, there's a war overseas and it stops a distribution line, which stops the stock market, which stops the cash flow, which spooks investors. There are so many dominoes in play that if you do your research too far away, as a seller, if you're a seller and you go, oh, I think my house is worth 1.5 because the house down the street got 1.5 6 months ago. It doesn't matter. It was 6 months ago. That is not a comparable market. And similarly, if you are a purchaser if you're going to look to buy and you're doing your research, I would say if you're jumping onto domain.com.au or realestate.com.au, maybe do a 3-month search, because you can toggle at the top. You want to look at a certain suburb with a certain bed, bathroom criteria. But you can also do the timeline that it's going to show you. I wouldn't suggest going back more than 3 or 4 months to do your research, because you're going to be looking at properties that were influenced by totally different external factors, not a true comparable. Now, again, you've got ability to research and arm yourself as a buyer, and I would suggest that everybody does. At the end of the campaign, when we get to auction day, an auction can't start without a reserve price. Now, that is the homeowner coming to terms with the 4-week marketing campaign. Who came through it? Who loved it? Who didn't love it? Why didn't they love it? The ones who did love it, have they seen the contract? Are they ready to buy? Have they got their approval? And all of these little factors are then delivered to the vendor the night or 2 or 3 nights before the auction, and they get to digest everything. Okay, well, we were hoping for 1 million when we started this campaign. The feedback's been coming in around the 9s. We've got 5 registered bidders who we expect to come to the auction. If they all play in the space around the 9s, competition on the auction floor might take us up to the high 9s. If we can call the property on the market around 990 or 1 million, and that's our reserve, and we call the property on the market, who knows? Those people could compete for another 5 grand, another 10 grand, another 100 grand. Then it comes down to supply, demand, and emotion. So the vendor goes into the auction knowing that unless the agent gets to my reserve price, my absolute bottom line, I will not sell it for $1 under, then an auctioneer knows when they can call a property on the market. And on the market lets the crowd know and the audience know that the reserve has been met or exceeded, and we are now playing for keeps. The highest bidder, without a shadow of a doubt, by formal announcement of on the market, will own the property. Ladies and gentlemen, would you like to bid again? Would you like to bid again? And that then happens at a lot of auctions where you have properties selling for 20 over reserve or 40 over reserve or 140 over reserve or 540 over reserve. That's then the element of competition, scarcity, supply, demand, and then emotional factors as well that come into an auction. So it's easy to get carried away, but if you've done your research, you're well equipped in terms of what you feel this house is worth, you should feel comfortable in your bidding, knowing that ultimately, if there's somebody else bidding with you and bidding with you and bidding with you, that's the market speaking. It's not just you bidding against yourself and bidding against yourself, and all of a sudden you own a house that's worth $500,000 more than anybody else was willing to pay. You're buying a house that's maybe an extra bid or 2 more than what somebody else is willing to pay. So yes, competition might take over, and yes, you might pay a little bit more. But in doing so, you've also just established what your new property is worth. Before the auction started, nobody knew what that house was worth, but we thought it might be worth $1 million. But after the auction, I have a contract now with a signature on it that confirms that this house is now worth 1.1. So there's an element of, oh my gosh, did I overpay? But there's also a reality that I've just established a new value for this property. And so from that day forward, that's what that home is worth. Market factors might make it deviate a little bit, but for all intents and purposes, you've just re-established the value of the home. The home that I auctioned on the weekend on Sunday in Glenwood, the vendor's reserve was $2.3 million. It sold for $2.602. Well, you could say, well, they paid $302,000 more than they had to, but the underbidder was at $2,601,000. So all they did was pay $1,000 more than somebody else and revalued that asset from 2.3 up to 2.6. They're now the proud owners of a $2.6 million home. So there is benefit in a competitive and transparent auction that you really get a chance to just pay a little bit more than the market, a little bit more than that other buyer. And if it stops and it's yours, you've established market value. So the other thing that does confuse people somewhat, and I thought it's probably worth mentioning, is the vendor bid. Now, at an auction, and you would hear them all the time, the vendor bid or the seller's bid. Now, depending on where you look in the Act in the state of New South Wales, they mean the same thing. At an auction, any seller in New South Wales reserves the right to place one bid during the auction. Now, that bid must be below the reserve. The owner cannot place a bid above reserve. Once we hit reserve, we're selling the home. If they place a bid above reserve, they're buying the home. They can't dance in a space once they've already for all intents and purposes, let go of the asset. Once we hit that number, we're bidding, we hit the reserve, and I've announced the property on the market, they can't play in that space. That space is for buyers to determine the true value through open and transparent competition. For them to jump in above that, well, they should have put their reserve there. They've already let go of the asset by virtue of where they deem to be fair and reasonable expectation. Anything over and above that, if they were to bid above that, quite literally, that'd just be pure greed. And even I, as an auctioneer, whilst illegal, would frown upon that and just say, look, that is ridiculous. The market is already giving you more than you wanted. Sit back and let it happen. But under the reserve, the vendor reserves the right to place a bid. So I'll use my hands a little bit. I use my hands a lot. But again, let's use the $1 million mark as a clear example. If the reserve is set at $1 million and the bidding guide is 900,000, and I say, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the auction sale of number 123 Fake Street. It's been a wonderful good morning and a great campaign. Thank you very much for coming on behalf of the team. Let's get the auction started. It's been guided at 900,000. All the comparables are sitting around the $900,000 mark. Who wants to start the auction? And somebody puts up their paddle and says 800. And I say, look, madam, I can't start at 800. We've been guiding it at 900 through the whole campaign. So you're all here because of the guiding and the research that you would have done. Why don't we start it a little bit closer? What about 880? And more than likely, I'll get a start. Somebody, if not that buyer, somebody else will jump in. The guide gets you to the auction. Your bidding gets you to the reserve. So we start at 880 and we go 900 and 920, 20 now and 25 and 30, 35 and 40, 45 and 50, 55 and 60, 65 and 70. And we stop at 970,000. Well, I'm under the reserve. The reserve's $1 million and I'm at 970,000. What I've now got is a space in which the vendor can place their bid. So I'm under the reserve and they can use that to affect where we're at. So their bid is effectively, it's monopoly money. It's not real money, but it's a benchmark. It's moving the buying from where the bidders stopped towards the reserve, remembering a vendor bid can never be more than what we went into the auction expecting to achieve. So in this example, the bidding flow might have been 5, 5, 10 and 5, 10 and 5, 10, and we're at 970. I might say during the flow of the auction, well, ladies and gentlemen, the bid's at 970,000 at the back. I'm going to nudge us north now at 980 with the vendor bid, and vendor bid puts us at 980. Who goes to 90? Is there 90 now, ladies and gentlemen, against the 80? Who goes to 90? And what I've done is I've used the vendor bid as a stepping stone to get us off 970 up to 980. And I'll tell you what, if the next bid is 985 or 990, well, most rational sellers will go, you know what, I'm not going to lose a deal for $5,000 or $10,000. We got this far. The vendor bid's got us a little bit closer. If anybody's able to bid over and above that, we might do a deal. Or at the very least, we might call the property on the market and let everybody know we're going to adjust our reserve, meet the market and sell. So a vendor bid is the vendor's one opportunity to bridge any gap between market and reserve. And a good auctioneer will often just hopefully seamlessly in the flow of the auction put that vendor bid in on behalf of the vendor where they deem it necessary. Before an auction, we never know where a vendor bid should be because we never know where the market is going to stop, if under reserve or above reserve. We don't know. That's why we go to auction. We want to hear from the market. So going into an auction, whilst you must start an auction, with a reserve price, a lot of the time the vendor bid, if used, and it's not always used, but if used, is a more fluid and reactive bid. If the reserve's $1 million and the bidding is 880, 900, 910, 920, 930, and it stops at 930, I might have to place a vendor bid up at 960 because I'm quite a way away from where I need to be. So that stepping stone needs to move from 930 up to 960 so I can then hopefully get a bid at 970 or 980. So it's used as a stepping stone. All an auctioneer in placing a vendor bid is trying to do is move the market off their bid closer to the vendor bid, and at the very least, shortening the negotiation window. So if you do hear an auctioneer say that they're using a vendor bid, you can be confident in a couple of things. We're not at the reserve yet, but that bid will put you closer to it. And if you are able to bid above the vendor bid, that puts you in the best position to potentially purchase the property. Because two things happen at an auction. If I hit the reserve or go above the reserve and there is no other bid, my hammer drops and you own the home. So in that situation, you want to be the highest bidder because the highest bidder owns the home. However, if I haven't passed the reserve and I'm in this grey area of I'm under the reserve but nobody knows how much because I haven't called the property on the market yet, You still need to be the highest bidder to negotiate first and foremost with the agent after the auction. So in both scenarios, or indeed any scenario at an auction, the onus on the registered buyer should be, no matter what, if it's within your budget, to be the last bidder. If you're the last bidder and we're above reserve, you own the home. If you're the last bidder but we're under reserve, you're the first person we talk to. And Anab, you saw this on Ridgeline Drive on Saturday at 11:30. You were at the auction. I was $50,000 under the reserve. So I put my gavel down and I said to the two registered buyers, guys, I'm going to be honest with you. We're under reserve. I put my gavel down. I'm not selling you the home. I'm going to give you a chance, though, to keep bidding to see who's going to be the last bidder under the reserve. And that person is going to sit down with me and the agent and the vendor after the auction, see if we can get this deal done. So sure enough, we had a $5,000 bid, then a $2,000 bid, then a $1,000 bid, then a $2,000 bid, then a $1,000 bid. All the while, whilst they were placing these bids, they're actually getting me closer to the reserve. So it was helping. Ultimately, both of them got exhausted. One of them said, good luck to you, handed back their bidding card and left. We stayed back. We passed the property in. We didn't sell. We stayed back. But what that had done was it narrowed the gap. We knew what we were working with. We knew we weren't at the reserve, but we knew we were close. We sat down with that buyer and we got the deal done. The vendor moved a little bit down. The buyer moved a little bit up. That house that you were there at, it sold about 10 minutes after the auction. But the point of me mentioning this is the buyer made sure that whether we're above reserve or under reserve, they were the last bidder. And that is important. And it is something that your buyers should know. And obviously employing somebody like you know that as well. If you don't buy it under the hammer, you want to be at that negotiation table because that's where the magic can happen. So it's very important. Apart from that, look, once a hammer drops at an auction, you're contractually obligated to purchase. 10% deposit is law in New South Wales. Whilst you can come to an auction and you can have spoken to the agent or the solicitor before and arrange for a smaller deposit, when you sign the contract, 10% is enforced legally, just as a consumer protection for the vendor. So a vendor will always have claim for 10%, even if you've agreed with the agent to just put down 5%. That other 5% is always the vendor's, whether or not they get it on settlement or through the legal system. The vendor is always entitled to that 10%. And then they can also challenge you for the other 90 or 95, depending on whether or not the sale fell over. And I'll be very honest with you, sales don't fall over very often. Buyers go and do their research, they look at contracts, they engage solicitors and conveyancers, and you sign the contract at the end of the day because you've bought the house. But do be aware that at auction day, if the hammer falls, there's no cooling off period. With a private treaty sale, 5 or 10 days, you put down an offer, that's held and you're given a cooling off period. And during that cooling off period, you can get the contract in front of a solicitor. You can organise an independent pest and building report. You can go and maybe shop around and see if you can get a better mortgage rate, a better interest rate. At an auction, once the hammer drops, you are locked in. You have just bought that house and there is no cooling off period. So just please be aware that if you are buying via auction, you need to have done your homework. You need to know your budget. You need to know your limits. You need to have had that contract in front of your solicitor. You need to know whether it's got termites, whether it's had any previous activity, whether or not there's any structural damage. Are you inheriting, maybe a pergola that wasn't, approved by the council, or maybe a pool fence that doesn't have its full compliance. In saying that, 95% of the pools in the northwest of Sydney aren't compliant, or they were built before common legislation came in with regards to setbacks and boundaries and step-ups. Those are things I wouldn't lose a deal over that. If your dream home has a pool that doesn't have compliance, buy the home, move on in, and when you got a couple of bucks, get it retroactively complied. Don't let the silly little minutiae talk you out of your dream property. But make sure that you're aware that when the hammer drops, you're liable. You're locked in. You've just bought a house. There's no cooling off period. I have had some buyers say, they've come to the table and they've gone to sign the contract. They said, fantastic. Can I get my brother-in-law in on Tuesday? He just wants to get up in the roof and check a couple of things before the sale goes through. And I'm like, what are you talking about? The sale went through in front of 300 people. Congratulations. So it is important to know those little bits of terminology and just to know that there is no cooling off period in an auction situation.
Mm-hmm. Stu, I think that is really good, those insights. And I think you shared the live example of the one that I was also there on Sunday. So that's really helpful, because that was like, it had everything, you had the buyers, you had the reserve, you had the vendor bid, you had everything there.
Yeah, that one had everything. Not only that, it was pouring rain, and there was
Yeah.
a late buyer who was maybe going to come, but then decided during the auction that they text a really silly offer and said, "Look, if it doesn't sell, we'll give you this." And we had all these different dynamics. But at the end of the day, we had a smart buyer who loved the home. He knew we weren't above reserve, but he made sure he was the highest bidder, and that afforded him the chance to sit down with me and negotiate. And I rolled up the sleeves with the agent, and between the two of us, our vendor and our buyers, we got a deal done. And look, and that turned out to be a bit of a win-win. The buyer paid more than he wanted to. The vendor accepted a little bit less than he wanted to. But the seller was able to stomach that movement because we showed him and his wife what the market thought the house was worth. So again, that transparency of the auction forum, sometimes you get rewarded, and as a seller you get more than you want. Sometimes you've got to move towards the market, but you can't argue that the market was there telling you what your home was worth. Do you accept it or not is up to you. We can go back to market on Monday if you like, but there's a deal to be done here today. So that's the beauty of the auction process. Mate, apart from that, I just think there are little things that, common mistakes is one of your topics. Well, it's the next topic on your agenda. And look, I see a common mistake is people just standing there when I ask for an opening bid and nobody wants to bid. If you came to the auction, you've done your homework. You can't buy the house without bidding. And as much as I understand it, buyers kind of don't as well, and you would as a buyer's advocate, that sometimes there's a lot of psychology to the bidding. You're standing there amongst a crowd and there's 5 other buyers and you're all a little bit hesitant, you're all a little bit sheepish. Well, it's almost like you're showing a little bit of intimidation or a little bit of uncertainty. At a 100-meter race in the Olympics for the gold medal, there's a prize at the end. Only one person's getting the gold. You got Usain Bolt and Michael Johnson, all these guys lining up, and they're different eras. They're never going to line up against each other. But you got the best of the best, the qualifiers. When the gun goes off and to start the race and the cap goes off, they don't all start looking at each other, wondering who's going to run first and who's going to run first. Swimming, the championships were just on. I was watching, swimming at all hours of the morning, and the diving block, and the signal goes beep, and the signal goes, and they don't all sit at the blocks and look left and look right and wonder who's going to jump. The prize is there, and there's only one gold medal. At the auction, there's only one house. When the auctioneer says, "Ladies and gentlemen, opening bid, opening offer," my advice to everybody, those people who hit me up in my messages every day of the week saying, "Stu, I'm going to an auction on the weekend. Can you help me be prepared?" I tell all of them, go out of the gate, start the auction, show the other bidders that you are there to play. There is a psychology to winning at auction. It's about being bold and confident, even if you're at the end of your budget. You're down to thousands of dollars. They don't know. The other buyers don't know your budget. The other buyers don't know your bank account. They don't know your job. They don't know what you earn. They don't know your stresses. They don't know your circumstance. If you bid confidently and boldly, almost flippantly, every time they place a bid, you just go 10 more, 10 more, 10 more. There's an air of confidence. You can deflate another buyer. The other buyer's going to be like, well, how am I ever going to out? This guy's got deep pockets. He's not stopping. You can, even if you're on your last dollar, if you play it right, like a poker face, you can win an auction. So I always say to everybody, like my tips, and look, I'm an auctioneer, so of course I want to help myself out a little bit, but start the auction. Imagine nobody else bids and 2 things happen. You buy it at that figure because lo and behold, the vendor says, well, you know what? Nobody else wants to bid. They're the highest bidder. Let's just sell it. So you get it for your first bid, which is unlikely to happen, mind you. But let's say you get it for your first bid. You came to an auction, you bid once and you bought the house. You've had a pretty good day. But if that doesn't happen and nobody else bids, I'm going to pass the property in. Everybody else has to leave and you get to stay behind. And then you get to do away with all the competition and all the pressure and all the drama. And you've just won yourself a seat at the negotiation table. Those 2 scenarios are exactly why you come to an auction as a buyer. You either want to buy the house without much competition, or everybody else has to bugger off and you get to sit down with the agent and the owner and work out the deal that works for you. So bid at an auction, bid confidently, realize that there's a psychology. But again, if nothing else, remember my little corny analogy that I just gave you. There's a prize at the end of that race, whether it's 100 meters, whether it's a swimming race, it doesn't matter what it is. There's a prize, and auction's no different. You're there, you're lining up. There are other people who want the same thing you do, but there's only one of them. Go out guns blazing. And at the very least, if you miss out on the house, You don't wake up the next day going, I should have done this, I should have done that, I should have tried, I should have pushed harder. Leave it all out on the floor. If you get the house, you get the house. That's what you came there for. But if you don't get the house, or you don't get the block of land, or you don't get the duplex, or whatever it is that you're looking for, at least you gave it everything. I meet so many people and I see them. I'm Hills born and raised. If you buy a house off me, you're going to see me at Coles, you're going to see me at Woolworths, you're going to see me at the hairdresser, you're going to see me at kids' sport, you're going to see me up playing basketball, yelling at referees, you're going to hear me, you're going to see me. The amount of people that I bump into that say, Stu, you know that one that I saw you about 3 weeks ago in Kellyville? I said, yeah. I say, well, we wish we'd bid another 2 times, or we wish we'd bid again, and we wish we bought that one. We've got that regret. I just say to everybody, don't leave with regret. It might cost you a little bit more today, but what costs you more today makes you money tomorrow. It's bricks and mortar in the northwest of Sydney. You would have to overspend by a ridiculous amount to not make your money back, almost by the time you've settled and moved in. Any overbid that you have overbid at an auction, you'll get back. Trust me, it's a short-term loan to yourself. All you're doing is lending yourself a little bit of extra money, you'll get it back. You look back 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. There isn't a house in the northwest of Sydney that hasn't doubled, tripled, or quadrupled in value. You're investing. And that's probably my parting word to any seminar that I have about real estate. It's an investment, and it's the best one that we can make here in Sydney when it comes to a material asset, because you get to live in it, you get to enjoy it, or if you're an investor, you get to have it appreciate whilst hopefully tenancy helps you depreciate your debt. It's just one of those win-win-wins on any metric, on any level, or you can use the equity within it to leverage it to buy more and more and more. You can't live in an art portfolio. You can't live in a Bitcoin wallet. You can't live in a coin collection. You can gather these things and collect these things and covet these things, and you can invest in these things. But when it comes to a bricks and mortar asset, you can live in it, you can enjoy it, you can entertain in it, and you can create memories in it. It's a unique asset class, and if it's within you to do so, stretch for it. It will reward you over time.
100% Stu. And I remember one of our auctions in the UA, the auctioneer, and I was the bidder. It was at Terry Place, I think close to your house.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I bid quite strongly, and then we ended up buying that one. And you came up to me and said, "Oh, you did very well." I kind of cherished that moment forever.
Oh, yeah. In terms of strategy, you came in at the right time. You came in aggressively with some of the bids. I think from memory, the bids were going in 5 and 5 and 5, and you jumped in with a 10 or a 15, and that kind of deflated and knocked the same people. And sometimes that change of pattern can really disrupt an auction. It's funny. I see people in auctions are going in 10 and 10 and 10 and 10 and 10, and then somebody goes 30. And you know what? 30 is really just you placing a 10, they place a 10, and you place a 10 anyway. So it's like all you did was shortcut to the next bid. But the dynamic of what it can do when people go, ooh, 30, and all you've done is you've just placed 2 bids at the same time. But the dynamic of what it can do, again, that sociological and physiological and psychological gamesmanship of the auction arena, you can just absolutely kill the thing and you win. And I remember that monetary place, actually. And of course, I remember because it's just up the road. That was sort of the dynamic in what you did. Your bidding, whilst gentlemanly and in the flow of the auction, was also demonstrably, it was disruptive, if I'm to use a word, on purpose, and it did exactly what it was meant to do. And again, look, far be it from me to educate the people on how bidding strategy, but you're definitely somebody that the viewers here, if they don't have questions for me, they need to be keeping in touch with you and your networks, because this is where your expertise come in.
Yeah, no, I have learned by doing many, so again, I'm not saying that as many as you, because 15 years is just way there, but yes, I have done many, and I've kind of I also pick up, say, oh, I did wrong in the previous one, I didn't go as hard, or I didn't prepare well enough, but then next time I'm better next time.
Yeah, and look, a lot of people, unfortunately, they miss out at auctions, and so they've got to go the next week, and they've got to go the next week, and they've got to go the next week. Typical buyer journey can be anywhere from 4 attempts of purchase up to 20 attempts of purchase. Very rarely do you get the first house that you go to bid on, unless, of course, you love it so much that you are just relentless and will not concede. But again, look, it's different journey for everybody. But I guess the moral to probably most of my anecdotes and things around, I guess common auction mistakes is waking up the next morning wishing I'd bid again. And that can often mean that maybe they didn't do their research going into the auction or truly value what the asset was worth. So an empowered bidder is one who's going to make, hopefully, the right decision on auction day. Apart from that, mate, look, I mean, in terms of how to do well at auction, and I'm conscious of time and we're sort of eating into, Q&A time, but, how to do well at auction circles back into what I just spoke about. You've just got to make sure that you weigh up your budgets versus the cost of opportunity. I don't want to go that extra $20,000, but if I don't go that extra $20,000, am I going to find a house that ticks these boxes? Am I going to be sitting on the sideline of this market for the next 4 weeks? Yes, I'm at this auction, I'm at my budget, but the next property, my plan B and my plan C and my plan D, I don't love them as much. So is it better to maybe overspend on this asset than go back to the market and back to an auction next weekend? So you've got this weigh up and this risk reward. I would just say to do as much research on that as well before you come into the auction and before you kind of give up. And I don't use the word give up. Nobody gives up at an auction. They just get to their budget and they fundamentally can't go any further. But I would just double check and make sure that, you're giving everything you can, because that regret can sit with you for a very, very long time. And your plan should be, to win the auction. So do whatever you can. And again, I'm available to help anybody, through their buying journey and, holding their hand up into auction day. I love doing it. And it's a true passion of mine.
That's great, Stu. I'll take maybe a couple of minutes to talk about, my perspective as being buyer's agent, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. And I have got questions myself, right?
Yeah.
I'll shoot mine before everybody gets on the line.
This isn't like and again, I don't use Teams very often. This isn't like a Zoom scenario where it's going to time us out. We keep going.
5 minutes left in your meeting, probably. Let me see what I can do here.
If you can extend it or.
Yeah. Let me just try. Let me try that first. Okay. Save.
My AI overview is telling me you open up the webinar in your Teams calendar, select edit, and make the necessary adjustments to the time. It should be as simple as that. If you are the moderator,
I just changed the time. I hope it has worked.
Okay.
All right. I'll just talk about buyer's agent's perspective. And yes, I think you have touched upon most of the things, but what I want to mention is, when you go to the auction, have the contracts reviewed, clauses negotiated or changed based on what you want, building and pest inspections done and reviewed as well, and understood what you're getting into. Because I've seen people, and I've seen it many times, people walk up to the auction, an auction day, and they just say, oh, let's, take up a paddle, and then, the bidding card, and then start bidding. That can get you into trouble. Not that you won't buy the house or you can't, definitely you can, but you might get into a situation which you probably wouldn't like after you have purchased. You talked about comparables. I think that's the very important part, and this 3 to 6 months are very, I would say that the latest ones are much better, which is, let's say, last month, what happened.
Oh, yeah. Honestly, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
The last 6 weeks, that's your sweet spot.
Yeah.
Further, but anything less.
Yeah. And this is what I say, because market movements are very important here, because, nobody knows how market will behave. But if you have seen some movement happening, let's say previous weeks, do expect that, the next property is going to go up, than the previous one. So just be prepared. I think, again, know about the property. Like when you're comparing, each property is very different. Are they a scarce asset? There may be properties which are very similar in nature. Stu, you would have gone to, let's say, Schofields, Talawang, many houses are very similar in nature. But you come to, let's say, the hillside, every house is different. It has a very lifestyle element to it or something different. And that's where I think you need to know how scarce is that. And defines the price as well, because everybody sees the same thing. And I always say and tell people that if you like that property very much, there are higher chances everybody else likes it so much too.
No doubt.
Yeah, and this is where I think, the last part, which I always say is, the budget or your final dollar figure. And it's when I say, the last to the last dollar should be there in your mind. You're not deciding on the auction day, because that can get you into the wrong foot or in the wrong place. So have that defined. If worst case happens, worst of the worst, this is where I stop. And that would make sure that you are stronger when you are bidding. So be strong, and then where when you reach your last dollar, walk out, right?
Yeah.
This is what I tell people, and by doing that, maybe you'll win the auction, or you may not win the auction, but at least in your mind, you know that you have done well without regret,
Yep.
So you come out of it, without that.
Yeah. That's the same conversation I have with a vendor when they say, Stu, I'm not selling the property under 2 million. I say, oh, okay. So if I get it to 1,990,000, we're not selling. And they go, oh, I'd sell it for that. I go, okay, well, then we need to adjust the reserve. The reserve can't be 2 million if you would sell it for 1,990,000. And I have similar conversations with buyers, and they say, well, Stu, I won't spend over 2 million. I say, okay, so if it's sold for 2,005,000, you wouldn't buy it? And they go, oh yeah, I'd buy it for. I go, okay, well then you just told me you're not spending $1 more than 2 million. But now you're telling me you wouldn't miss it for 2,005,000. Go back to the drawing board. Go back, get a piece of paper and a pen. Work out your actual break. I will not spend $1. Then go to the auction. Know your actual limit.
Yeah. 100%. That's what I also always recommend people: know your limit, but know it to the T, not just, this is where I think it's great.
Yeah.
And I think always the buyer, and this is a known fact, is that buyers want to buy it at the lowest price, and the sellers want to sell it at the highest price.
Yeah.
But if you go to the auction thinking that I'm going to buy it at the lowest price and this asset is really good, then be very sure it's going to go way over. All right.
Yeah, you're very unlikely to be its owner in half an hour.
Yeah. And the last part, I think, when it comes to really when you're coming at the auction or on the auction day, try to arrive a little bit early. Just familiarize with the place.
Yeah.
Calm down. Calm down. I think that's more important. Just calm down. If the auction is there, I'm pretty sure Stu, you are there. Have a chat with him as well. Just make yourself comfortable. I think if you are comfortable, you have a plan, you'll be able to execute the plan better. And trust me on this. As I say, if you have lost the auction also, but you'll feel still, happy that you have executed the plan in the right way, and that's.
You can, and that's like anything. As I say, like it's like sport. It's like anything. Like if you knew that you executed and you did everything you possibly could do, and at the end of the day, somebody better or with deeper pockets, or if they won, they won. But you don't have any regret in yourself that it was anything that you could have controlled. Budgets are one thing. Budgets have got to do with the bank and your mortgage and your income and your expenses and things like that. You can't really influence that too much to a degree, unless during the middle of the auction you decide I'm going to change careers and get a better job, and from Monday morning I'll earn another $100,000. That's not going to happen. So you can let go of that and control the things you can control, and just little things, mate. Like you just said, leave home, even if you know that house is only 20 minutes away from where you currently live. Leave 30 or 40 minutes early. Don't rush yourself. Don't panic. Auction day is stressful enough. Parking on auction day, little things like parking on auction day is not going to be the same as what parking was at the open home. At the open home, you might have 10 families there. On auction day, you're going to have all the cousins, all the uncles, all the aunties, all the neighbors. You're going to have all the buyers, all their friends, all their nieces. Auction day, you might have to park 2 streets away. Little things like that. Plan to arrive 10, 15 minutes earlier than you normally would have. Calm down, breathe, come talk to me, come talk to the other auctioneer if it's not one of mine. Go and find your circle of friends, have another look through the property, breathe. Like you said, you don't want to have that frazzled nature impacting your train of thought during a very important transaction.
Great. So I'll shoot some questions to you, Stu.
Sure.
Yeah. Just conscious of the time, and people also might have other stuff. All right. Tell us about one of your most memorable auctions Now I know there'll be many, right? But if you have to pick one of them,
15,000 of them, and I love them all. Look, I've had auctions where I was calling an auction a couple of years ago out in Riverston, and as an auctioneer often does, we get people driving past in cars and yelling out things. And we were calling this auction out the front of the property, and this bloke drove past in a ute, and he just goes, "What's the bid, mate?" And I said, it was a flood-affected parcel of land with a little shack on it. I said, the bid's at $690,000 at 690 against 680, and we're actually on the market, sir. And he goes, 700. And I said, mate, have a good day, have a good day. And he goes, no, 700, hang on. And he does a U-turn. It's just this Aussie, he does this U-turn, comes out. He goes, can I register? And I went, yeah, if you want. And the woman who was in the lead was like, no, he can't. Knock it down. I'm like, madam, I work for the owner, and my job is to get the most. And he is the public, and he wants to register. I am basically obliged to take his bid. I won't drag it out. I'll give him 5 minutes. He doesn't have a chance to look around the property. He's made his bed. I said, sir, so you understand that you if I drop the hammer, you're buying the property? He said, yes. I said, so if I register you, if I pause this auction for 2 minutes, you're going to bid. He said, absolutely. So I paused the auction for 2 minutes. We quickly registered him. He said, can I buy with a 5% deposit? I said, not a problem at all. So he goes, what's that, 35 grand? Yeah, not a problem at all. He registered bid 700. And the woman was like, oh, you're kidding me. She went 705. He went 710. We ended up selling it for about 730, which was about 40 grand above reserve. And he bought the thing. So whilst I've had properties that have sold for millions of dollars above reserve, and I've auctioned on Channel 7, I've auctioned on the block, I've done some pretty cool things, I'll never forget old mate driving past in a ute, and I thought he was heckling me because we get it all the time, and he actually bought the house. So that's I don't know many people who can say that.
no, unheard of. I have never heard. I think this is the first time I heard this thing. All right. I think from what you said, I'm picking up one question from there. So there are buyers who get frustrated and say, why are you not putting your, capital down, And can you just talk about it? Because I have seen at one of the auctions, not yours, and the person just walked off and, because he couldn't understand what's happening and he wanted to buy it.
Yeah. The fine line. Look, an auctioneer has a short period of time to win the audience over. I'm lucky enough that I'm familiar enough with most crowds that most people know, my joking nature, my confident nature. I'll push back on some bids. I'll accept some others. And at the end of an auction, I will slow down some bidding and give people time to think. Not all the bidding is going to be bid. It's not all going to be fast, and it's not all going to be fluid. There are people that are spending a lot of money, more than they thought they were going to. And at the end of the day, when the hammer drops, they either have deep regret because they missed out, or they have a big mortgage that they weren't anticipating getting. And if I know that we are well above reserve and we are at a tipping point or a breaking point, I've got to be considerate of the fact that this is a big decision. And if a young couple says, Stu, can you just give us a minute? I'm going to give them a minute. It's a life-altering decision. They're either going to walk out that door in 10 minutes as the proud owners of the house, and we're going to take a photo of them out the front, or they're going to go back to their car, call mum and dad, upset that they didn't get it, and they've got to go to another auction next week. I understand the gravity. I also understand that the person in the lead wants me to drop the hammer. But the script can flip pretty quickly, and before they know it, they might be in that position where they're now the underbidder, and they're needing a moment. So I get it. Everybody in the lead wants me to hurry up and drop the hammer, but respectfully, I am working for that vendor, Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner, who bought that house 10 years ago, who've done up the bathroom and the kitchen, they've spent money on it. They also need as much as they can get from that sale to buy the next property. Their kids are about to go to high school and the high school fees. So I know perhaps a little bit more of what they need than the buyers do. So I'm playing middleman between want and need. And so I'm trying to, in a polite and courteous manner, but also trying to diffuse some tension, trying to let everybody know that I am obligated to find out what this property is worth. And if this young couple would like to pay me another 1,000 or two more, I'm obligated to take it. So just give me a minute. I understand you're in the lead. And the good thing is you're in the lead. If they decide not to bid, guess what? It's yours. You get the house. I'm not asking you to bid again. I'm asking you to give me a moment. And I think as long as it's explained well, most people understand. But I have, as well as you have, as you mentioned, I've been at auctions. I take my tie off and I sit at the back a little bit indescript and I nondescript, and I sit behind. I don't like to interfere in other people's auctions or even be seen. I don't want bidders coming up to me going, oh, hey, Stu, I don't want to take any attention away. If I go to somebody else's auction, I take my tie off, I sit at the back, and I just go incognito. But I have seen exactly what you mentioned, where it's not explained or it's not justified or it's not clear, and buyers get the absolute irrits and they hand back their paddles and they storm off. It's how an auctioneer handles it that can make the difference in those sort of situations.
Yeah. Thanks, Stu. We've got a question in Q&A from Vikram. He asks, what percentage of auctions go unsuccessful in the hills?
Yep.
Either because of reserve price or there were no bidders. So either way.
At the moment, if I look at my metrics and then group metrics from larger companies like McGrath, from Ray White, from Cortality, and also from other auction houses as well, the northwest of Sydney, and that's pretty much, I determined that from pretty much the West Pennant Hills exit of the M2, all the way up through to, well, Marsden Park, Malonba. Even if you look talking Greater Western Sydney, that corridor, it's all merging and touchy because of the new roads and infrastructure, and it's all just Greater Western Sydney and Northwestern cities converging. The clearance rate through that corridor, Hill Central through to the fringes, at the moment is sitting around 70 to 73%. Now, I'll be very clear, that is properties sold within 28 days. So it includes properties that are listed for auction but sell after 2 weeks and sell prior. That's considered an auction sale because that property had intentions of going to auction, but the auction process and the unconditional nature of negotiation got that property sold. So it was sold because of the auction process. It just didn't sell on auction day. So it's a combination of sold before auction, sold at auction, and also sold after auction up until the stroke of midnight on auction day. On auction day, we are under auction conditions until midnight. If a property passes in at 11 a.m. in the morning, it doesn't mean that it's a failed auction. We still negotiate with the buyers, and if we can get a deal and an offer and an acceptance before midnight, the property is sold. So we generally track at the moment, as we head into spring, with our low stock levels and the interest rate movement, we're seeing strong auction clearance rates through the northwest of over 70%. If you then track how those properties, so those 28% of properties that didn't sell on auction day, if you then track those for the next 2 weeks, we find that at the moment, I'm checking the data that I've looked at through Cortality, probably the last 3 months worth of data, that 20-odd% of properties that don't sell on auction day, 91, I think it was, or 90, it might have been 89% of those properties would sell within the next 2 weeks after auction. So auction day can be a bit of an eye opener for the vendor. Oh my, isn't worth what I thought it was worth. Let's get serious. Let's get this thing sold. Or, oh my goodness, I've bought a house and I need to settle, so we need to get aggressive. Let's price this thing right and get it sold. Or buyers, now they realize what the property is worth or isn't worth. They come back to the property. Maybe they've gone cold on the property. They come back to the property because we've now got a price guide on the property, and then it gets sold. So we see a lot of movement in the 2 weeks after auction. And so if you look at the 28-day 72% clearance rate plus the 89% of remaining properties, within 6 weeks, we find that well over 90% of auction properties are sold. So it's a good method of sale. And if you want to sell within 6 weeks, you're pretty much guaranteed. And if you want to have a competitive auction, at the moment, 7 out of 10, you're a likelihood of selling on the day if you are realistic with your reserve. That's also a little caveat, a little asterisk. If you're a seller, you've got to listen to the market. The market values the home, not you.
Fantastic. Next question will be from me, and this is one of the big ones.
Oh no,
Stu,
I'm lucky.
Dummy bidders. Dummy bidders. Yeah. So I think we have seen some news and things, they are not good for I would say anyone, but that has been there, in reality. So I think your take on that, and then maybe how can buyers be protected, or as an auctioneer, do you do you do something about this?
I was going to get this question, but I can't shy away from it. I'm an advocate of auctions, and I'm an advocate of our industry as well, and a staunch one at that. I'll be clear: dummy bidders are categorically illegal. Back in the day, a long time ago, before my time, vendors would get their mates to turn up at the back, and they just place a bid at the tree casually and bump the bidding up 50 grand, things like that. They're categorically illegal because they influence an outcome that is, and should be, and will always be, as far as I'm concerned, at my auctions, determined by legitimate buyers who want to buy a property. But they do happen, and there's obviously big news stories about it at the moment, particularly through our area. I can only apologise on behalf of the good humans within the industry that something like that has happened. But yeah, at the end of the day, buyers in New South Wales have to register the bid. If you are registering a bid, that means you're presenting the real estate team who are holding the auction with your driver's license so that you can be tracked and traced and held accountable. So these dummy bidders that we're hearing about in the news at the moment, or at any auction, if they are ever revealed to be doing what they're alleged to have been doing, they should have been given driver's licenses and forms of identity and 100 points of identity to identify themselves, which means that the legal system and the departments of fair trading and all other consumer affairs departments have recourse against those people. If those credentials were falsified by the agent is going to be held accountable because their license is ultimately on the door or on the listing or on the contract or on the agreement. So, but it does rely on reporting, and sometimes if it seems too good to be true, it is, or if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it is a duck. I would say to anybody, I'm a consumer advocate at the end of the day. I work for vendors who are consumers, I work for agents who are consumers, and I work with buyers who are consumers. I'm an advocate through and through. If you go to an auction and you think something isn't right or something didn't feel right, or all of a sudden there were bids coming over the telephone, and then as soon as the property was announced on the market, the telephone bidder just stopped bidding. If you think there's something sus or something that should be reported, report it. The only way that these things come to light and the only way they get stamped out is when good people make sure that they do. But
Thanks.
Categorically illegal, mate. I mean, dummy bidding, to my knowledge, don't happen at my auctions. If there is a bidder in front of me holding a paddle, I've got to assume they've been through the property, they like the property, they love the property, they've registered to bid at the property, and they're buying at their own volition. And if they're not there, I double check and I make sure that the agent has got their driver's license photocopied or they've been sent a screenshot of it, and I can verify that it's not, it's not somebody with the same surname as the agent or somebody with the same surname as the vendor. I'm giving you my best opinion that this is a genuine buyer, and at the end of the day, that's all I can do. But again, if you think there is something fishy going on, there are channels to make sure that these people are looked into and found guilty if appropriate.
Yeah, which is what is happening now. So I think it's good for the industry, good for real estate, good for everyone.
Oh, it's good. It's good for everybody. Without these things, we need a clean industry. You don't have these sorts of things happening to dentists and these sorts of things happening. Like, it's just, we need the dodginess disassociated with our industry so that the champions and the good blokes and good lasses within our industry get the kudos they deserve and they earn.
No, 100%. And that's why I think, not that's why, but I like auctions because it's happening in front of you. It's open door, everybody can see it. Everything is clean up, means you are actually competing against maybe the other buyer who are equally interested, like the same as yours.
Yep.
All right. Do we have any more questions, or I can keep going asking? I can ask one more question and let the attendees also ask question.
Yeah. I'm conscious that 15 minutes. Yeah. That's because as I said at the start, guys, I talk and I talk. It's what I do. So jump in with any questions if you've got. But I'm also conscious that it's 7:15 on a weeknight. So if you've got kids to pick up or meals to cook, I understand that as well. And what I would say is, as well as the QR codes that have been furnished to you, and I will obviously do a follow up with this, guys. My suggestion of being open and available for conversation is genuine and true. If anybody wants to reach out to me via text message, email, SMS, whatever it is, approach me at an auction. I'm all about empowerment of buyers and consumers and people who are just curious about the auction process or real estate in general. Whilst I'm an auction expert, it's also private treaty. It's also the listing process, the selling process, styling, advertising, every avenue. I'm certainly happy to be your go-to.
All right, I'll ask the last question that I have, and then I will open, again, the QR codes for people if they want to just connect with us. So the last question from me is, what is your opinion about the $1,000 bids or $500 bids, which we see maybe, sometime in the middle, sometimes towards the end?
Yeah. Again, look, I understand that people have budgets, and so those bids at the end of an auction are more often than not them fighting tooth and nail for the home. That's them giving everything they've got to make sure that they get that house, or if they do have to miss out on that house, they don't wake up the next day going, oh, I should have tried 1,000. Oh, I tried. So a lot of that is just me trying to empower and enable the, I guess, the would have, should have, could haves, and make sure that everybody's getting that 100% chance. I will not take low bids at the start of an auction. At the start of, again, we try to start auctions at the guide. The guide got you to the property, and then your bidding will get you to the reserve. If I take 1,000 bids from the start, like $1,000 or $500 from the start, well, you know, I'm gonna be there for an hour. I'm gonna be like 500, 500, 500, 500, 500. I'm gonna be there for an hour. So I insist on bigger bids until I get towards the pointy end, and then I'll start mopping up everything that's left and making sure that everybody gives it their best. Again, remembering that I'm working for Mr. and Mrs. Vendor, and my job is to get them the highest possible price in the market, and I do that unapologetically. My job is to get the most. I'm sorry, but it's in a transparent environment, and nobody's forcing you to bid. If you don't want to bid, don't bid. If you don't want to buy it, don't buy it. Or if it's above your budget, don't buy it. It's as simple as that. It's just an open forum for you to put your offer on the table. If somebody puts a better offer, then you can put a better offer. And if somebody puts a better offer, you can put a better offer. And at the start of an auction, I'll do chunky bids. It might be, if I'm in a multi-million-dollar suburb, those bids might be 100,000, 100,000, 100,000. And then we get to 50,000, 50,000, 50,000, then 25s and 25s, and then 10s and 5s and 5s. We normally shrink and contract the bidding as people's budgets get exhausted. So the indication, the 5s and the 1000s, should be an indication of budget exhaustion. At the start of an auction, you've got the money. I know you've got the money because we're at the guide, we're not at the reserve. So I want your 20, your 20, your 20, your 10, your 10, your 5, your 5. And I appreciate that once we get into the rarefied air of, well, we had 10 bidders, but we're down to the last 3. Well, I know as an auctioneer and as somebody who's reading the crowd and reading the flow and knowing the values and knowing my market, I know we're getting to people's budgets because I know what this house is worth. You don't, but I do. So I know. And so for that reason, I will open it up. Now, I'm not going to get silly. I'm not going to take a $200 bid or a $100 bid. I have done that in some situations. The agent has said to me, you know what, Stu, they're 2 young couples. They're first home buyers. This is a house that they both love. Let's just let them go. And I have taken auctions where I've had 100 bids of $300. But you know what? In certain situations, I will take it. That is the minority, though. The majority of auctions, they might slow down to $5,000 increments at the end, and most properties will be won or lost for the sake of a $5,000 bid.
Yeah, and some of the auctions where I've seen, and this is where I was getting into, is that, you know, there were 2 buyers, and of course, you know, most of the time there are 2 who are like competing at the end, and they were doing $1,000 bids and $500 bids, and they went over 50,000 by doing the same, you know?
Yeah, I think that example that you just said, that blows my mind. If the auction was, let's say the auction was $1.3 million, right? So there's the 2 of them there, and the bidding is at $1.3 million. And then somebody goes 1,301, 302, 303. And as you said, we end up being at 1,351,000 and it sells, right? To the person who started that little back and forth at 1.301. If they'd have just gone 25, knowing that the other person was at the end of their budget, knowing that the other couple was at the end of their hook and couldn't go much further, if they'd have just gone 20 would have stopped the auction. But because they did 1, well, 1 was achievable and 1's achievable and 1's achievable. As a buyer, your sole objective should be to stop the auction, not to keep going. And thousands, more than likely, are going to keep it going. Again, your objective should be to stop the auction. So in that situation that you spoke about, and the one that I'm talking about, the hypothetical, rather than letting it go 1, 1, 1, 1, 5, 2, 2, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and letting it add up to 50, just stop the auction with a $20,000 bid. In spending $20,000 more, you probably save yourself 30 because you avoided the back and forth. And you did that on Terry Place. You bid disruptively, boldly. When other people were slowing down, you put your foot on the gas. And you might have been at the end of your budget. I don't know. But what you did was...
Pretty much.
But you shut it down, right? What you did was you shut it. If you'd have gone 2 and they went 2 and they went 2 and they went 2, we might have moved another 60 grand. Great for the vendor, but you would have overspent, but you just knocked them out. So again, your objective as a buyer should be to stop the auction in your favor. Bid confidently and knock out the other buyers. Knock them out.
Right. No, thanks, Stu. Thanks for so much insights and, talking about how exactly auction works and what the best thing for, the buyers to do. I'm just going to open the thank you page for everyone. And here you can see the QR codes. So you have Benson Auctions QR code. You can see, the stuff, the work that Stu is doing, and you can reach out to him as well anytime.
Yeah.
So Hills and Shores and Sydney Property Talk, I recommend people to join here because, we discuss about properties. It's Sydney properties, so we are not talking about the whole Australia. We talk about Sydney properties and
Yep.
markets, what's happening. You can ask questions. We look forward to guide people. How much ever we can. All right, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Yeah, look, yeah, again, just to wrap up on my previous point, I am well and truly available to anybody and everybody, just for advice or for any questions. I have some sellers saying, I got a property in Schofields, for example. Which agent should I speak to and things. I'm happy to give you unbiased, neutral, as neutral as I can possibly be, as somebody who sees the whole market, who's been doing this for 23 years. Hills District born and raised. I've got family scattered throughout the district. I want nothing more than this Northwest Corridor to continue to flourish. And for those who are looking to invest or own or occupy, to continue that I guess that wealth creation through the good old Australian dream of owning a house. So if there's anything I can do to help or empower or demystify or explain, please feel free to reach out to me at any time through any medium. And yeah, if you can't find me, you're not looking hard enough because I'm everywhere.
That's true. No, thanks again, and good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time and joining us tonight.